tax freight train is bearing down on your retirement. To protect yourself, you'll have to harness the power of zero.
Hi there, it's David McKnight. Welcome to the Power of Zero show. Grateful that you're with us for another week to learn more about the Power of Zero paradigm. I am the best-selling author of The Power of Zero, Look Before You Lerp, The Volatility Shield, and soon to be released in November of 2020, Tax-Free Income for Life. Happy to report that I just handed my final polished manuscript over to my editor at Penguin Random House and just working through final revisions on that as well. So excited for that to come to you and anxious to hear your feedback. Today, we are going to be talking about the coronavirus stimulus bill, how this affects you, and absolutely what you need to know. Now, the first thing that I want to jump into here is how this is going to affect investors. Now, I'm going to tell you what this bill allows you to do, and then I'm going to tell you whether I think you should do it or not, okay? One of the first things that they allow you to do is you can now take up to $100,000 out of your retirement account, be it a 401k or an IRA or what have you. You can take up to $100,000 prior to age 59 and a half without any penalty at all. You will have to pay tax, but you won't have to pay any penalty. They're also going to allow you to increase the amount of loan that you could take from your 401k. Formerly, the maximum loan you could take in a given year was $50,000. They're increasing that to $100,000, so you can now take a loan up to $100,000 out of your 401k. And loans that you may have already taken out where payments were due in 2020, those are going to be deferred until 2021. Another big piece of news of which you need to be aware, RMDs are going to be waived for 2020. So whatever that RMD was that you may have been forced to take for 2020, you will not have to take for 2020. Now, will this create a hole in the IRS's or the federal government's revenue for this year? Certainly. How are they going to fill that hole? Well, that's a really good question. We're going to talk about that by the end of today's podcast. Now, this coronavirus bill was more than twice as big as the last previous largest stimulus bill under Obama in the immediate wake of the 2008 mortgage crisis. That was about $850 some odd billion of stimulus. This is 2.2, so it's more than double. This is the single largest stimulus bill in the history of the world. And lawmakers are telling us that the size is appropriate given the size of the crisis. What exactly are we paying for with this $2.2 trillion stimulus? Well, there's a lot that goes into it. So let's dig in real quick. $504 billion goes to large business and local government loans. $377 billion goes to small business assistance. $290 trillion goes to one-time checks to Americans. We're going to get into who qualifies for those here in a second. $280 billion goes to business tax cuts. $260 billion goes to extended unemployment benefits. $180 billion goes to health spending. And that's a minimum figure. $175 billion goes to aid state and local governments, $45 billion for disaster assistance, $42 trillion for food stamps and safety net, other spending is $35 trillion, education spending $32 trillion, personal tax cuts $10 trillion. Sorry, all those numbers were billion. Let's talk about the stimulus checks real quick. Who is going to get stimulus checks and how quickly will you get them? Well, individuals who make up to $75,000 per year and heads of household who earn up to $112,500 per year will receive a $1,200 check from the federal government, while couples who earn up to $150,000 annually will receive $2,400 checks. For those who exceed those income levels, the benefits gradually reduce at a rate of $5 for every $100 of additional income. And that's eventually capped at $99,000 for individuals, $146,500 for heads of household, and $198,000 for couples. In other words, if you make more than those amounts, you will not get a check at all. Additionally, parents who have kids will get a $500 check per child. They're calling these rebates. Okay. When will you get these stimulus checks? If you qualify, you can get them in as few as 2 to 3 weeks if you have your automatic bank deposit info on file with the IRS. Apparently 70 million American households do. I'm not sure if you don't have it currently on file, if it's too late to get it on file. But if you don't have it on file and you don't plan on getting it on file, you're going to get mailed a check. The problem is, how long is it going to take them to mail the check? Could be 3 to 4 months. At that point, will the crisis have passed? Will it be too little too late? Who knows? Will there be, there's already rumblings about another stimulus bill. Now, remember, this is the bill that we're talking about today is actually the third bill that has been passed so far. The first couple sort of went to states to help them shore up their hospitals and things like that. This is the first one that really affects everybody. But the Democrats are pushing for another bill, specifically Nancy Pelosi, that really beefs up the benefits for food stamps, increases direct deposits to Americans to as high as $7,500, and puts some environmental restrictions on airlines. So there is a lot more, I believe, coming down the line. I think there's going to be a lot more spending going on. I think there's going to be a lot more money that has to be borrowed, printed, what have you. Now, one of the ways that's being floated to pay for all of this is a plan that involves minting a couple of $1 trillion coins. Under the plan, the Treasury would mint 2 $1 trillion coins and then deposit those coins at the Federal Reserve. Forced by law to recognize the coins as legal tender, the Fed would add $2 trillion to the Treasury's account. The Treasury would then use this money under Congress's direction for stimulus. So I know what you're thinking. It sounds like funny money. It sounds like we're playing around with monopoly money. Well, that's exactly what we're doing. Remember that there are some universal financial laws at play here. And when you violate them, there's always a chicken that comes home to roost. Okay, what would happen if we were to create 2 platinum coins, each of which were denominated as $1 trillion each? Well, that would precipitate massive amounts of inflation because money is valuable because it's scarce. When you create more of it out of thin air, it's what we call fiat money, it becomes less valuable. So that's the first implication of creating all this money. But the reality is, according to the New York Times, according to experts at the New York Times, the way that this is going to be financed is by borrowing money. We are going to borrow the $2 trillion to be able to pay for all of this additional spending. Now, Larry Kudlow, who is the Donald Trump's financial guy, I was watching this interview actually yesterday. They asked him, they said, how are you going to avoid raising taxes to be able to pay for all this additional spending? Remember, $2 trillion is roughly half the size of the federal budget. The federal government brings in about $3.4 trillion. They spend about $4.6 trillion. So they're running deficit spending at about $1 trillion, a little over $1 trillion per year. So these are not tiny numbers that we're talking about. These are massive, massive numbers. $2 trillion is half. $2.2 trillion is roughly half the federal budget. So when Larry Kudlow was asked how this was going to be paid for, he says, not only are we not going to be raising taxes, we are actually going to be reducing taxes. So I know what you're thinking at home here. You're thinking, how do we have all of this additional spending? How do we suspend, for example, RMDs for 2020? How do we create all of these additional benefits out of thin air? And the answer is that you don't. There is always an unintended consequence if you either borrow the money or you print the money or you create trillion-dollar coins. Massive inflation is invariably the result of printing all this money, and that chicken will come home to roost sooner or later. It may not happen immediately, but that chicken will come home to roost sooner or later. If we borrow this money from China or Saudi Arabia or Japan or what have you, that also has massive unintended consequences, because what it does is it accelerates everything we've been talking about in every podcast up to this point. It's really piling $2 trillion on top of all of the other debt that we already have. So we're closing in on 24 trillion. So you go from 24 trillion to 26 trillion. What are the unintended consequences of that? Well, we just lower the interest rates. The question becomes, who is going to, if we need $1 trillion, soon to be $2 trillion every year from some other source other than tax revenue, who is going to loan us that money? I can't fathom why countries would want to continue to loan us the money. In fact, I predict that they will stop loaning us money unless we raise interest rates. So what this in effect will do is it will raise interest rates, okay, sometime very, very soon. Why will it raise interest rates? Because countries will not want to loan us money based on these low interest rates, because it's not a good risk for them. Okay. Unless we're paying them really high rates of interest, it's not a good deal for them. They're not going to loan us money and not get anything in return, especially given how fiscally precarious our country has become. So what I predict is that in the next 5 years, this will precipitate a dramatic rise in interest rates. What it will also do is it will make it that much more difficult for us to service all of our existing debt, which means that we are probably going to have a crisis on our hands much sooner than we were before this crisis. Now, am I saying that this $2.2 trillion coronavirus bill was a bad thing or that we shouldn't have done it? No, I'm not actually opining on that at all. I'm not telling you whether it was good or bad. I'm just telling you what I think are going to be the financial consequences of having gone through with it. So right or wrong, these are the financial consequences of having gone through with this bill. Now, next week, or in the coming weeks, I'm not going to make a guarantee on next week, but in the coming weeks, I am going to share with you why I think that 2030 is a massive year of consequence for our country. Write that number down. 2030 is going to be a massive consequential year for our country. And because of this stimulus bill, I think that may have even been pushed up to 2029, maybe 2028. But it's accelerated everything. The bottom line is this stimulus bill has accelerated everything. We took 3 years worth of debt, 2 years worth of debt, combined it on top of the 1 year of $1 trillion deficit that we have for this year. So it's like we're running a deficit of $3 trillion this year. Whether lawmakers tell you this or not, this has massive unintended consequences for everybody in this country. And once again underscores the importance of implementing a power of zero approach to retirement. That power of zero approach eliminates tax rate risk. We're almost certainly going to have higher taxes down the road. And it also eliminates longevity risk. It helps you make sure that you do not run out of money before you run out of life, and all in a tax-free environment. All right, that's the show for today. If you're looking for a Power Zero advisor, head on over to davidmcknight.com and fill out our intake form. We're happy to help you with that. And if you are an advisor and want to transition your practice to a Power of Zero type practice, you can head over to powerofzero.com and opt into the video series. We'd be happy to talk to you about it. If you're looking to buy books in bulk, you can head over to powerzero.com/books. And once again, I would love it if you subscribe to the podcast, and you will get notifications every week letting you know that this podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much for being on the show. We will talk to you same time next week.